Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is Lori Ward, Washington's National Park Fund. We'll get started in just a minute. We had a really solid sign up today. Over 200 people, 250, almost 300 signed up, which is great. Our dreams for these when we started was to reach under that, and Scott has been a big draw. He's got a great story to share with all of you. We have 90 folks signed on right now, so we're going to give it another minute. Scott, we already have a question. Are you ready?
Let's hear it.
Let's have fun with this. Somebody wants to know, what's your favorite thing to eat on your trips?
Favorite thing to eat on my trips? Gosh, I'm pretty boring when it comes to snacks on the trail. I do like a good bar, a trail bar, but it's across the board. You know, I've kind of experimented with a whole variety of bars, but really what I would say I like is sometimes we bring in like a tiki masala with rice for dinner, or chili mac for dinner. You know, I'm pretty simple guy when it comes to food, and anything really tastes good way out there, miles away from anyone. So
that's great. That's great. Thanks. As you all settle in here today, do note questions in our Q&A box down at the bottom. We had so many people sign up that why is this recording as a question is because we post these on our website. So we post them afterwards because many people want to participate but aren't able to. So that's why we're recording. And if you have questions, enter them in the Q&A. We'll respond. We're not going to open up the chat box just because of the volume of people that we have. Let's see. I'm Lori Ward. I'm CEO of Washington's National Park Fund. It's 12:01. We're getting there in the participation, which is great. Anybody guesses of the peak behind on my backdrop there, besides Scott? Anybody guesses? That is Mount Shuckson, and it is at dusk, and it is from Artist Point up on, yeah, good job, Andrew, up on Mount Baker, and it is so beautiful. And it is actually the first mountain that I climbed, and I had the privilege of experiencing that. And here's a picture of myself and my husband up on Shuckson, and we that's the night before we summited. It's a very technical climb at the end. It looks technical, and it is, but extremely rewarding. That's actually Mount Baker in the background, and so we had a great experience there. Thanks. And we have one more question that I want to get to before we dive in. James, age 5, Scott, he wants to know what your favorite mountain is.
my favorite mountain in the North Cascades, I've always said, is Black Peak, which is actually right behind me. It is just a special peak to me. It's one of the first big peaks I climbed in the North Cascades. And yeah, and it's just absolutely stunning when you stand on top or even look at it from down below. Beyond the North Cascades, that's a tough one. I love many peaks. If you're talking about outside of Washington, whether it's Denali or Mount Everest or Kilimanjaro, or too many to count, but North Cascades, I would have to say my favorite's Black Peak.
Scott, is that you over your shoulder, or are you looking from Black Peak?
That is my climbing partner that you see in this image, and I'm standing on the summit proper with my camera photographing my climbing partner. So.
Scott, it's a beautiful shot. Really, really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. we're going to go ahead and dive in. I'm Lori Warren. I'm CEO of Washington's National Park Fund. What a privilege it is to have everybody here today. We have close to 300 people, and Scott's been a good friend of ours for several years now. And he is a professional photographer. He works with a lot of outdoor industry brands, shooting lifestyles and authentic experiences around the world. Just a really great down-to-earth guy, and he's got a book that has done extremely well that features his 50 peaks in the North Cascades that he did when North Cascades National Park celebrated its 50th anniversary. And I think I'm going to just stop there and turn it over to you, Scott. And we are really grateful for you being here today and sharing your story. And here you go.
Well, thank you, Lori. Thank you so much. And thank you to the Washington's National Park Fund. What an awesome surprise, and just super thankful when you guys asked me to join the next virtual field trip of the next segment, which is North Cascades. I do believe this is the first virtual field trip of this series that covers this national park, North Cascades National Park. In the past, there have been the field trips covering Mount Rainier and Olympic National Park, and I do believe the ones coming up will also be again turning to those park and then back again to North Cascades. But so super thankful to be here, and just thankful for all that the fund does for our three great national parks here in Washington State. Now, any chance I get to chat about the North Cascades National Park, I jump on that opportunity 10 times out of 10. It is hands down one of my favorite places. It is the favorite place on earth to me. It's where I discovered mountains personally, and it's where I really came to be and do what I do today, which is an outdoor photographer. So very excited to share, kind of jump into the park with you today virtually, and share some photos and talk about my 50 peak project. But I'm going to be getting more into that. So let's jump right in. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that screen properly. So let's dive into the park. As we all know, it is one of our three great national parks, and unlike Mount Rainier and the Olympics, it's situated in the northern part of Washington State and next to the Canadian border. And as you can see from this visual, it's almost a sea of peaks, and I'm going to have photographs that further establish that saying that this North Cascades Park and range is often described as a sea of peaks. And this national park in particular is unique in so many ways, and we're going to get into many of those ways. But one way is that it's actually a complex that it's made of several different units, and that's unlike Mount Rainier or Olympics. And so let's put up the poll for the audience to look at and give their answer of what they think doesn't belong, or what doesn't make up the complex. So the question is, which of the following is not part of the North Cascades National Park complex? And the answers include North Cascades National Park, Mount Baker Wilderness Area, Ross Lake National Recreation Area, or Lake Chelan National Recreation Area. Now, if we could take down the poll just for a moment, or turn it to the side. So I'm going to be kind of unveil the answers here. As many of you know, or some of you may not know, the park consists of a north and south unit that is the national park proper. But in addition, there are two national recreation areas: Ross Lake National Recreation Area and Lake Chelan National Recreation Area. So we can put up the poll results again and see how you all did. Looks like the majority of people properly selected Mount Baker Wilderness Area as not being one of the units that make up the complex. So, and that's absolutely right. Although very close to the park and the complex itself, and often associated with the park, it is technically outside the national park complex. So, all right, let's dive into one of the more popular areas of the park along the North Cascades Highway. We're off to Diablo Lake and Ross Lake. Now, this is a fairly unique vantage of these two lakes. Many of you who have visited the park have often looked at Diablo Lake from the overlook, which I'll show a picture of in just a moment, but just wanted to pause at this visual and share how this is a view of the two lakes from Colonial Peak, the summit of Colonial Peak. So a unique vantage of these two lakes. And I want to just do one other quick poll and ask you all why these two lakes have different colors. As you can see, the lake below Diablo is more of a turquoise color, whereas Ross Lake above is more of a blue color. So we'll just take a moment and you can read over those potential answers and choose the answer that you think is best. Alrighty, hopefully the answers are coming in here. So do we think it's because one is freshwater and one is saltwater, or do we think it has to do with green food coloring, or perhaps it has to do with floating particles of glacier rock flour, aliens, or perhaps maybe it's just a better reflection of green forest? What's the answer? It is, yes, it looks like 83% of you chose correctly. The answer of why these two lakes appear to have different colors is because the sunlight scatters through the floating particles of glacier rock flour on the two lakes differently. And so that's always a question I get, why Diablo Lake looks the way it does. So I thought that was a fun question to bring up. So let's take a look at some more traditional views of the park. This is perhaps one of the most visited parts of the North Cascades National Park, and many of you have either visited this or perhaps seen a photo of this. This is Diablo Lake Overlook, arguably one of the most accessible and beautiful spots in the park. And it's, I've been lucky and so privileged to visit this spot too many times to count, and I can tell you it just never gets old to see this view. Now, to juxtapose or compare this this extremely accessible spot with, I would say, one of the most inaccessible spots and one of the most remote spots in the North Cascades. This is a picture of the Pickett subrange of the North Cascades. The Picketts are a small, actually, I shouldn't say small. It is just a sub-range of the North Cascade Range. It is located within the national park, and the Picketts themselves, I would say, are some of the most rugged, jagged, ice-carved peaks in the entire range. And I just, frankly, am obsessed with the Picketts because I just think it's a magical corner of the park, but one of the most remote and inaccessible areas. Now, not only does the park have areas that are very accessible and then very inaccessible, the park also varies differently between seasons. We have wildflowers in summer. This is another view looking down at Diablo Lake from the Sourdough Trail. And then comparing summer with the depths of winter, where it's a truly inhospitable environment, and the terrain is covered with rock and ice. So fascinating extremes that one can appreciate or experience inside the park, and it's something that just has always made me look at this park in a unique way. Whichever season or whichever area you find yourself in, if you're able-bodied and you're able to hike up or climb up into the peaks, you often see this view of repeating mountain layers. And this is why the North Cascades are called a sea of peaks. And it's just, I've been lucky to see this view many times, and just always so thankful when I get the chance to see this. And I'm always, the phrase comes to mind, it's a sea of peaks, and it holds true. Now, we all have discovered this park in our own unique way, and some of you might be learning about this park for the first time today, and if so, that's amazing. I'm so glad you're joined us. For me, I just wanted to say a quick bit of how I came upon the park. I'm actually born and raised in the Midwest, Minnesota, and I didn't come to the Pacific Northwest until 2013. And we, my wife and I, moved to Seattle in 2013. And although I maybe would have called myself outdoorsy at the time, it's safe to say that I wasn't too outdoorsy in hindsight. And I slowly just started to hike and backpack in the Cascades, primarily east of the Seattle, what I wouldn't describe as the North Cascades. But within a few months after that move, back in 2013, I picked up a book by a photographer and pilot some of you might know, John Skurlock. I picked up his book, Snow and Spire, in the Seattle area, and opened it up, and I learned about the North Cascades for the first time. I was looking upon images of these amazing ice-covered peaks, and I couldn't believe that this mountain range and this park was just a few hours away, you know, in our proverbial big backyard. And I immediately had to go up there and see these North Cascades for myself. So again, in late 2013, not really knowing much about the outdoors, I went up to Marble Mount and drove past Marble Mount and decided to try to climb Trapper's Peak, which is a peak some of you may have been to or heard of. And long story short, I did not know what I was getting into, and I encountered feet of snow, and I recognized that I did not have the skill set to navigate in these mountains, or long story short, I needed to basically get more experience under my belt before I could go climb these peaks. And but before I turned around, smartly turned around to go back to the trailhead and made sure that I got out safely, I snapped this photo of some of the peaks. I just got a kind of a peekaboo view of a few of the North Cascades peaks. And I remember looking up at this and thinking, wow, that looks like a castle in the sky. And I was never more enchanted than I was at that time about the North Cascades. And it was that failed attempt to hike and climb a peak that really invigorated my interest and just heightened my intrigue of the North Cascades. And within months, I was able to get some mountaineering experience under my belt and go back into the range and start slowly experiencing the park at all different levels, hikes and climbs and mountaineering. And it's just, slowly became one of the most special places to me personally. And I developed such a deep connection with the park. And so that brings us to 2017. And I came up with an idea that basically explains why I'm presenting to you today. But before we get into that, let's throw up one more poll asking about the timing of when this park was started. So the poll is, what year was North Cascades National Park established? And there's 5 different options. Take a moment and select what you view as the best answer. Okay, once we have enough answers come in, feel free to reveal the answer. Looks like we have a smart audience today. Looks like the majority of people correctly selected 1968 as the year that this national park was established, which of course means that in 2018 was the 50th anniversary of this park. And so the year prior, in 2017, it was, I happened to learn of the fact that this national park, this favorite national park of mine, and this local landscape that truly transformed my life and allowed me to become a mountaineer and as well as an outdoor photographer, was turning 50 years old in 2018, the following year. And almost immediately had the idea that I would celebrate this 50th anniversary by attempting to go out and climb 50 peaks inside the park during the 2018 climbing season. And I had different views of from my colleagues and climbing partners, whether they thought this was possible or not, or feasible or not. But you know, by spring, he's taking steps to prepare for this project. I was determined to see if I could make it happen, and I poured through you know, my collection of climbing books and guides, a few of which you see right here, and basically poured through and figured out which, you know, if I could actually climb 50 peaks during the 2018 season. I poured over the beta and the information on the climbs, you know, that required glacier travel and rock climbing and different route finding and navigation. But I came upon the sense or the conclusion that I could at least try this and give it my best bet. And then I turned to getting myself outfitted, prepared for this journey. We ultimately took 5 months. So as you can see, this is a little bit of a kind of a lay down shot of much of the gear that I took. You know, a big thank you to Eddie Bauer for, you know, outfitting me for this project and, you know, putting the right gear in my hands and supporting the project. As you can see, this is the almost the full spread of gear that I used throughout the project. And once we're done talking today, I'd invite any questions about particular gear or packs or anything like that. But the time came mid-May to start, and I looked to the mountain as my first peak. And so let's go to Ruth Mountain. All right, hopefully no one's getting vertigo or sickness by the Google Earth journey to Ruth Mountain. But here we are, Ruth Mountain. Mid-May, I found myself, along with my climbing partner, Colton Jacobs, up near Hannigan Pass, kind of on the Mount Baker, the side of Mount Rainier that's closer to Mount Baker. And we looked up at my first objective, my first peak, Ruth Mountain. As you can see, this is mid-May, about what this looks like probably right now, even though we're all staying, you know, safe at home. This is probably what the peaks look like right now at this elevation, you know, almost completely snow covered. And we made our way up to Hannigan Pass. And although we were initially planning on camping and then summiting the next day, we said, let's actually go for it that same day and hopefully reach the summit by sunset. And so we made our way up the ridge, and to the west was able to spot this view of Mount Baker kind of hiding behind Shucks and Arm. And we made it up just as the sun was setting to the west, and we made it up to the top of Ruth Mountain, and it was a glorious first summit. And this is a photo from Colton Jacobs, my climbing partner and friend, of me with Shuckson, Mount Shuckson in the background. Definitely a kind of a lesser viewed side of Mount Shuckson. It's often viewed from the Artist Point side. But truly an amazing first summit. And if I had any doubt at that time about whether this project was something I should be taking on, that doubt went away at that moment as I was standing on that first peak. And I said, this is right. This is good. This is an amazing start to this journey. I'm going to see this to the end. So we slowly made our way down after that summit, just, you know, pretty much overjoyed that we were able to get up, and, you know, of course, taking precaution to get down safely. To the west, as is often the case, kind of a blanket of clouds kind of seep into the valleys, and you know, it creates this surreal scene, one that it just gets me every time I have the chance to see it. And snapped this last photo of my friend kind of descending back down to our camp at Hannigan Pass, and wrapping up that first trip. So, and if anybody had any question, I sadly won't be covering all 50 peaks during this presentation. That would take too long. So I'm going to be just sharing a few highlights and then opening it up to questions. But let's jump to the kind of the middle of the project, peak 15 through 18. And this was I was reaching this time at the month of July. And I would definitely consider the month of July kind of prime time for alpine climbing and mountaineering in the North Cascades and in the Cascades as a whole. So in July, I was joined by my friend Jake Moon, and we made our way to the Inspiration Glacier, which is where El Dorado Peak and a variety of other peaks sit. And we made our way up to the glacier, set up camp, but sadly we're completely socked in with clouds. And it was a bit disheartening because it was a 3-day trip, and I wanted to make sure to climb at least one peak each day. But there we were on that first day of that trip, and we could barely see outside our tent, and we certainly couldn't see any of the peaks as they were just completely socked in by the low cloud layer. And here's another shot of camp with the Inspiration Glacier behind it. Now, luckily, as we were going to bed that night, we looked to the south, and we saw some signs of hope. Some light was leaking in from the west as the sun was setting, which gave me a little bit of hope that when we would wake up, hopefully the sky would clear and that we could climb. And sure enough, we woke up to a climber's delight, bluebird skies. So we geared up and started making our way across the Inspiration Glacier. And in addition to El Dorado Peak, which is definitely a classic peak and climb in North Cascades, on this trip, I decided that I wanted to attempt to climb 3 other peaks: Klawati Peak, Ostera Peak, and Dorado Needle. So given the revised plans and setting out on our first climb on the second day now, we decided to go climb Klawati Peak as our first objective. And here we are, and my climbing partner is kind of booting up a steep snow slope. And I should note, for anybody, wanting to get into mountaineering and climbing, which is definitely a privilege in my eyes, it takes some investment in gear and some developing of a skill set. But I do want to note that, anybody interested in getting into climbing and mountaineering know that, it's important to have the skill set and the understanding and develop experience gradually, in addition to having the right gear. So just kind of a side note as I thought of it there. But here we are, making our way up to that first peak of that trip, Klawati Peak. And as you can see in this image, behind my climbing partner is a huge just spread of peaks. And let's go to the next poll, which asks the park's highest peak. What is the highest peak inside of the North Cascades National Park complex? And I should maybe actually revise this: inside the North Cascades National Park proper. So let's put aside Lake Chelan or Ross Lake NRAs and ask, what's the highest peak inside the park proper? Is it Goody Peak, or sometimes pronounced Good, depending on what school of thought you're in there? Mount Shuckson, Forbidden Peak, or Mount Logan? So choose what you think is the right answer. I'll give you a hint. The answer is of a peak that you can see in this photo. Okay, I'd say when we have enough answers, let's reveal the correct answer. All right, I wouldn't say a majority, but the most people did actually incorrectly choose Mount Shuckson. So this was a little bit of a trick question. I suspected that some people would think Mount Shuckson may have been the highest peak, and it is an absolute glorious and extremely tall peak as well. But in fact, the tallest peak is Good, or Goody Peak, which is actually the sharpest peak on the left horizon in this photo. Sadly, a peak I did not get to climb, but is still on the list. That's a beautiful thing about this project that I did, that even though I set out to climb 50 peaks, the range holds a lifetime's worth of climbing and exploration, and it's a beautiful thing. So after Klawati Peak, we made our way across the glacier, had to do a rappel down to the Klawati Glacier. There's some recession of the glacier due to climate change. And so it's involving some kind of new terrain challenges. Made our way to Ostera Peak. And I really enjoy this photo, although it was taken in the harsh midday light. I love this photo because you can see a huge array of geological features. You're actually from left to right seeing the Klawati Glacier, the Inspiration Glacier, and then to the right, you're seeing the McAllister Glacier. And as you can see, these glaciers are fractured. And luckily we have, through the North Cascades Park and the North Cascades Institute and things in other organizations, there's been studies going on, and we're learning about the impact of these glaciers due to the changing climate. And although it's sad to see them fractured and breaking apart, it is at the same time a beautiful scene to be up there, miles away from anybody, and to look upon this land of rock and ice. It's just spectacular. So after Klawati and Ostera Peak, we continued on to Dorado Needle. We thought we were feeling pretty good. We said, let's try a third peak of the day, and here we are. And and this was definitely a fun climb, a class 5 climb, which means a bit more technical and requiring rope and gear placement inside the rock. And so at this point we had climbed 3 of the 4 peaks, and we were feeling very ambitious and said, let's make it 4 for the day, 4 peaks. And so we decided to march over to the 4th and final peak, El Dorado Peak. And this is moments before we summited that 4th and final peak. And as you can see, it's a truly unique summit, El Dorado Peak, and it's almost a wave of snow and ice. And we marched up that fin of snow, truly a kind of a knife edge snow arete, and made our way up to the peak and summited that 4th peak of the day, a bit of a grand slam in my eyes, and undoubtedly the biggest day I had in the mountains. And again, just never more grateful and privileged to be out there. And it was just an amazing day. Quick selfie with me and with Jake and myself. I'm not one to do selfies, but I did make a point of with each summit I did, I snagged a quick selfie to prove that I was there. So a fun trip, and that was close to the midpoint of the project, the 50 Peaks project. And so I'm going to just cover one more trip a bit briefly, just to be mindful of our time. And I mentioned the Pickets earlier, a sub-range of the North Cascades. The Pickets are undoubtedly the most rugged and remote part of the North Cascades. And I know I'm not alone when I say that this part of this local landscape feels mystical, magical, whatever you want to call it. It's truly a special place. Now make no mistake, although I love to climb and mountaineer, I am definitely not an extreme athlete by any means. So when I decided to go into the Pickets, I put my eyes on one of the easier peaks to climb, Luna Peak, which happens to actually be the tallest peak in the Pickets. This was peak 39 in late September, kind of closing in towards the end of the project. And so we start this big trip actually on the waters of Ross Lake. So let's head on down to Ross Lake. And so we cruise across Ross Lake in the ferry that you can catch from the Ross Lake Resort, and which is a unique and exciting way to start the trip. And we took the boat, the ferry, to the Big Beaver Trailhead, and jumped off the boat and onto the trail, passed across the campground, and within a few miles we enter into the wilderness area. We look up at some amazingly tall trees, and some of the biggest old growth trees inside the park complex. And to look up at these trees in the same way that you would look up at redwoods in California, you just feel so tiny, but it's just a special moment. So let's pull up one of our last polls. I apologize, it might be our last one, or there might be one more. This poll is: what percentage of North Cascades National Park is legally designated as wilderness area? So is it 54%, 74%, 84, or 94? Just take a moment and see if you can guess the right answer. All righty, let's reveal it once we have enough responses. And the correct answer is 94 is the correct answer. And I apologize, that's input incorrectly, but 94, most people guessed 84%. It is in fact the 94% of the national park is actually wilderness, which is a unique characteristic for national parks, and makes the park visitor experience very special, in that you can often feel like you're truly away from it all, and among the first people to set foot on a trail or look up at a tree. So to continue on this particular trip, our Luna Peak trip, we made our way up, and a lot of bushwhacking and cross-country travel made it to here, to Luna Col, and right before the sun was setting, over Mount Fury. We looked to the south, to the southern picket, a photo that I shared earlier. Truly a rugged set of peaks that stop me in my tracks every time. And so we went to bed and excited to summit the peak the next morning. Woke up to cotton candy skies in the sky, and we knew it was going to be a special day. And we made our way up to Luna Peak. Again, a photo from my friend and climbing partner, Colton Jacobs, of myself, getting up to the top of Luna Peak and looking back westward to Luna Lake and Mount Fury, and even in the distance, Mount Baker, Culshan. So this will be the last climb that I cover in this presentation. Too many peaks to cover, but by mid-October, 5 months after I started the project, I luckily stood on my 50th peak, and was just so thankful to have the opportunity to do that and shine a light on this peak. Shine a light on this unique park. A lot of deep connection that I had and have with the park. And I never felt more thankful to have this park in our big backyard. So real quickly, I'll go over these questions as they're often asked. My favorite peak was Forbidden Peak, one of the 50 North American classic climbs right there in our North Cascades. Easiest peak, and I should probably describe this as the most non-technical peak, was Sourdough Mountain. And some of you might have experienced this hike up to Sourdough Mountain. It's a several miles of steep trail, but it is a trail, and it's an absolutely gorgeous area inside the park, looking down at Diablo Lake here. This trip and peak, I would have to say that the Snowfield Colonial area, that's the subset of peaks that you look up at when you are actually at Diablo Lake. Going a little bit quick here, just mindful of our time. Sketchiest moment, and maybe I shouldn't have used the word sketchiest, but definitely a moment where I was feeling my nerves when we were in the Chilliwack Range, which is right along the Canadian border, and doing a ridge traverse between two of my peaks. And this is a photo that I took of my 3 climbing partners as we made that traverse, and luckily made it through safely and without injury. But definitely one of those moments where nerves are getting to you, but you're dialed in with your focus. And lastly, the longest trip was actually my very last trip in mid-October. Made our way to the Whatcom area and climbed the 49th and 50th peaks. And I love this image as I just stepped off my 50th peak. And again, was never more thankful to have this amazing national park right here in our state, and to have just this amazing wilderness that we can go in and respect and protect, and make sure that others down the road experience it as we have. So thank you, everybody. Forgot about this slide. If you're interested in my numbers, feel free to take a photo or a screenshot, but these were my numbers. But again, putting aside, there was no pioneering or conquering of mountains on this trip. I'm a fairly experienced climber, but definitely no athlete, no record setter. So just excited to get out there and pay tribute to this amazing park on its 50th anniversary, and shine a light on its beauty. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Lori.
Scott, that was great. Yeah, so many things, so many thoughts. Julia, age 5. Julia wants to know, what's your favorite thing to see on a mountain? What's your favorite thing to see on a mountain?
Gosh, the favorite thing to see on the mountain, I would have to say, is just wanted to check, are you getting a visual of me or the presentation?
You're good. You're
okay,
good.
Sounds good.
Yep.
Favorite thing to see, and again, it's a privilege for me to even say this, but when I'm climbing and I stand up on a summit or a ridge line, and it's one of those unique moments when the cloud layer sinks into the valleys and you look down on the clouds, and that is such a magical moment. And I have been able to experience it, maybe a dozen or two times, and that's how lucky and privileged I am. But when you get to see that, it's so special, and you're entirely in the moment. And that's the beautiful thing about this park and our other parks and our other public lands. They really allow you to experience your environment and experience the present moment you're in. So that's how I would answer that question.
Good answer. And we see it behind you, Scott, the clouds in the valley.
That's right.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Can you go back easily and pull up the photo of of your climbing partner with the headlamp on the snow? Can you do that?
Yeah, one moment here.
Sure. And I believe this is on the cover of your book. Is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And let's see here.
We have a great question from Amos coming on this.
Gotcha. And I think this is the photo you referred to.
Beautiful.
Yeah, Scott, this was peak number 1, and I thought to myself, how am I going to top this after peak 1? I got 49 to go, and so I felt awfully lucky at that moment. That's for sure.
Here's the question from Amos. When you take photos of your climbing partners like you did there, how much time and planning can it take to set up that photo? Is it set up? For example, your picture of the photo, your partner coming down Ruth Mountain. What's your answer to that?
Yes, great question. And I will say it goes both ways. There are times when I'm entirely in the moment and it's completely candid and kind of I'm documenting on the go, and just take a moment to snap a photo of my climbing partner and to get them in the scene and in the moment, and while we climb or hike or experience the park in another way. But don't get me wrong. And there are other times, and I have no shame in this, where I ask a climbing partner to stand over there at that particular point, or hike this line, on the trail, or do something like that. And just as an outdoor photographer, I try to, whichever approach I'm taking, I want to capture an image that kind of encapsulates how I'm feeling and how we're feeling about the experience and about the environment that we're in. And whichever way I do that, that's kind of the end goal, and so that I can share that experience with others.
Thanks, Scott. Chelsea wants to know what color of Sour Patch Kids is your favorite?
God, I'd have to say blue, hands down is my favorite. I should say that 800 number of Sour Patch Kids was definitely guesstimated. I just wanted to kind of compare it with the other numbers that I achieved, the mileage and the elevation gain. I thought the count, the tally of Sour Patch Kids was mentionable, so noteworthy.
Makes sense. What size were your packs, Scott? What size?
Yeah, it would depend on if I was going out for a day trip or an overnight. You'll recall that image of all my gear being laid down, and off to the left of that image was an Eddie Bauer Terrain 55 liter pack. And that is actually a pack I probably wore the most. And so, 55 liters. And I can tell you that pack got me through the project with flying colors. And that's a great, for me, and it really comes down to personal preference and how much gear you yourself bring. And mind you, I'm often bringing a lot of camera gear as well, so that makes my situation unique. But for me, about a 55 liter pack is a great pack for, say, a 1 or 2 overnight.
That's great. Let's see. Do you have any ambitions of doing all or part of the Pacific Northwest Trail through the North Cascades?
I do have ambitions to do part of the Pacific Northwest Trail. I've been saying this for too many years, but I would love to do Section J or Section J and K of the Pacific Crest Trail. And that would, Section J, as some of you might know, starts from Snoqualmie Pass and ends at Stevens Pass. And if I were to continue and do Section J, I believe that goes all the way to Rainy Pass. And I've experienced segments of those two sections, you know, on various trips in the North Cascades and in the Central Cascades. And I have suspicions, and I've also heard from others that have done it, that it's just some of the most spectacular scenery and landscapes you can come across and hike through. So that is definitely a dream of mine. No real ambition to do the full PCT. You can say I'm a bit domesticated for that. I like my comfy bed at home and you know, my lifestyle here. But I think Section J and K someday would be an amazing adventure.
We have one more to ask you, Scott, and it comes from Rachel. What time of day is your favorite to photograph?
Yeah, great question, Rachel. I would say my favorite time of day to photograph actually is sunrise as opposed to sunset. And that's because the experience is moving from darkness, you know, often complete darkness if I'm getting up that early before sunrise, into light. And that's in addition to seeing the sky and the color, you know, really transform. It's cool just to have everything kind of pure before you. And I've always, and I should mention, it's often when fewer people are out. You know, I'd say sunsets are definitely more photographed than sunrises. So I would say that's my favorite time, about at sunrise and the hour that follows.
Thanks, Scott. As we wrap up, I just want to say Scott's book did sell out, everyone, and he's taking a waiting list now. You can Google him at Scott Kranz, Kranz, and you'll find information. Someone asked about where you're from in Minnesota. Everything's right there. He lives here in Seattle now. We're lucky to have him. I just want to say a few things. One man's dream back in 2017, one man's dream became this reality. And that's remarkable, Scott. You listened to your heart and you went for it. So we are grateful for that. I just want to also call out in memory of Fred Beckey. What a man. And he passed away, and his legacy lives on, and you referenced him often. So thank you for that. If it wasn't for Fred Beckey, we wouldn't be where we are in our national parks. I love the line "Cotton Candy Skies." That was really cool. And so as we begin to wrap up, everyone, we thank you for joining us. Washington's National Park Fund has a lot of fundraising climbs. Board members lead them. REI is involved, Alaska Airlines, Two Beers, Seattle Cider. If you want to get involved, let us know, reach out. And we just are really grateful to you and to Scott today, because the sale of his books has generated thousands, quite literally, thousands of dollars for Washington's National Park Fund. And it's people like Scott who step up and give back to their parks through Washington's National Park Fund. So we're grateful to you, Scott, and everyone. Have a great afternoon. Stay well, and we'll be back in touch next week when we feature transporting the mountain goats from Olympic National Park over to the North Cascades. It will be very, very interesting. Sign up on our website. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. And thank you, Lori.